Welcome to Illuminati Silver. We tell you the truth about silver. Today is Tuesday, the 21st of January, 2020. And at the time of this recording, which is 12:35 GMT, gold is currently standing at $1,557 an ounce, and silver exactly at $18 an ounce. There is some fear because of the epidemic in China, as we mentioned on the weekend, that stock markets have taken somewhat of a hit today, and it will be interesting to see if this is carried forward when Wall Street opens in a few hours' time. But meanwhile, we have slightly more important fish to fry. And what we mean by that, quite simply, is that on the 11th of January, we published a video podcast entitled Global Geopolitical Update with Controversially Greg. Now, if you haven't had the opportunity to listen to this, we've included it in the description box below. Now, under the article, one of our listeners by the name of Force Majeure actually wrote a question, or in fact, a number of questions. And we thought that we would have a discussion with Controversially Greg today and try and answer them to the best of our ability within the amount of time that we have available. So first and foremost, before I read the question, let me just check if Greg is actually online. Greg, good afternoon. Are you there?
I am, and for a change, the sun's out.
Well, Greg, force majeure. I'll read his comment or question in full. Fantastic. Glad to have discovered this YouTube channel. Please would Controversially Greg mention, if he hasn't done so already, what might the future of the EU look like, especially in a world that is trying to find ways around using the United States dollar? Germany and Russia look like might gain stronger ties, especially concerning trade. And will the EU or Euro collapse? Or there be further integration? Could there be a splintering of the EU in a north, south or east, west? Many thanks. Now, Greg, there's a lot to deal with there, and I'm going to let you deal with that in any order you wish. But if you address any aspect of these questions, can you please say in advance which part of that question you're dealing with, one at a time?
Being a simple style, I'll do it in exactly the same order that Force Majeure has asked it. And then should people wish to refer back to his questions, you'll find them as questions listed under that particular podcast we did. So his first question, please could I mention, if I already haven't, even if I have, it's time to refresh. What might the future of the EU look like, especially in a world that is trying to find ways around using the US dollar? I think the future of the EU is very flexible at the moment, in that if it does not make radical changes to the way it operates and relax its attempts at political integration, I think it is going to so extensively annoy many of its members that they will merely follow Britain's lead and decide that they wish to be independent of the EU. We were perfectly happy to enter the European Economic Community or Common Market. It was when it started to see itself as far more terribly important, with huge numbers of unelected bureaucrats, that we found that we really had no place in this centralized committee-run organization that we had so little in common with. I think many other countries will start to feel that this Franco-German project is basically becoming a step too far. They do not see themselves as part of a greater Germany. They do not see themselves as wishing to be ruled by basically an unelected committee of bureaucrats, highly paid bureaucrats. They do not wish to be treated as the French have been doing with their own people, who dare to question and make civilized protest and against the actions of their government in a peaceful format and find themselves at the wrong end of the CRS, heavily armed, being beaten up every time they set foot in the street, which to date is 62 weekends later. The enforcement force of Macron and the European Union is still beating up French citizens in the street, although it's not much covered in the mainstream media, because that is the way in which Europe would seem to be going. So I think that unless they make draconian changes to this method of authoritarian abuse of their people, the European Union will be gone in between 5 and 10 years, collapsed in its own ordure. However, if they make extreme and intelligence change to make it a much freer, much more economic link, they may survive, but I wouldn't put money on it. And 17.4 million people in Britain, in the largest vote in Britain's history ever, agreed with me that they didn't want to go on putting money in it either. So I think the EU is currently teetering between total collapse and massive change and modernization. So I hope that deals with it. The first part of the question, what will the EU look like? We don't know. It depends how they act. If they act intelligently, they will potentially, in economic terms, start to make sense. If they don't, they're finished. As to, especially in a world that is trying to find ways around using the US dollar, Europe has had aspirations to become, with its euro, a major reserve currency. I personally don't think it will work. I don't think it will work purely and simply because one size does not fit all. We've seen what a disaster the euro can be for countries like Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, to begin with, and how expensive it's proved to be for Germany propping it up. I don't think that it is going to make the grade as a reserve currency that could oust the US dollar. However, the fear of America that the US dollar might lose its supremacy as reserve currency of choice on a global basis is very real and very noticeable. We have had a war, 2 wars now in Iraq in order to prop up the US dollar. The American determination with the US dollar has led to strained relationships with Iran for a very long time. It was behind the overthrow and murder of Muammar Gaddafi, and it is still a very contentious issue with Iran. The point with Muammar Gaddafi, for instance, is that he had obtained the agreement of a large bloc of Africa and the Arab Middle East to work towards the gold dinar as a currency of choice for the peoples of Africa and for the peoples of the Middle East. This was a challenge to the US dollar. It couldn't be countenanced, and it led to his murder. And therefore, I think we need to consider almost every action on a global basis that involves currency in terms of the US dollar and its determination to remain reserve currency of choice. being minded that Iran and Iraq were at one stage aiming to set up a currency bourse of a currency that would be recognized beyond their borders. China, you may recall, agreed to trade oil in the new currency, and so did a number of other countries. This challenge underpinned the wars in Iraq and much of the animosity between America and Iran. So, with the world seeking the possibility of dealing in another currency than the dollar, this must be borne in mind in any decision making. Be minded that the oil of the Middle East is backed by 1.9 billion Muslims who wish to use a Muslim-based currency. It is their more peaceable alternative to the caliphate. So I think you'll agree that that brings an end to that question regarding the dollar. Then the next question is, Germany and Russia look like they might gain stronger ties, especially concerning trade. I think this is very likely. Germany has always been looking for a route to expand its own income, its own trade base. And let us go back a few years, and no one much commented on it at the time, but you may recall the German Chancellor, as I recall, Schroder, who was gifted a directorship in the Russian structure, a directorship of Gazprom. It was then transparent why he had been negotiated within the European Union for a pipeline across Poland and Germany from Russia for Gazprom. The payola would seem to have been his directorship the moment that he was no longer a German politician and no longer a big wheel in the unelected structure of the European Union. So, yes, this is going on numerous ways and has been for a very long time. So I think it is something to watch. Russia, of course, has been hoping to complete a back takeover of Europe ever since they left the First World War, having found that that was not going to prove the route with Germany to create a structure across Europe. They realized they backed the wrong horse, and they went home and had their own revolution. And then, through their KGB of the day, you may recall that they commissioned the Frankfurt University Sociological School to complete a survey and explain why communism, after the end of the First World War, had not spread by natural osmosis across Europe. The answers were that fundamentally Europe was not readily available at that stage to make radical changes, and it didn't trust what had occurred as a result of a very bloody rebellion in Russia. As a result, the old KGB of Russia purchased the Frankfurt University Sociological Faculty and renamed it the Frankfurt School, and started to work on ways of undermining Western civilization to make it easier to transplant the system of communism across Europe. It has always been Russia's intention in the long term to steadily encroach on Europe and take control across the German border, across the Polish border, and onwards to the Atlantic. I don't think that has ever been off the cards with Russia. And in many ways, having a bellicose nation in the form of Germany, who were themselves expansive, has proved very beneficial for the rest of Europe because it has blocked the Russians merely steamrolling forwards until they got to the Atlantic coast. So, yes, it is a situation that needs to have a close eye on it, probably for the foreseeable future over a very long period. I trust that answers that question. The next question, will the EU or Euro collapse? He has linked the two together as a single entity, and I think he is right to ask the question in that manner. I've already commented on where I think the euro is potentially coming unstuck. So, will the euro collapse? I personally think that it probably will, as certain countries probably disassociate themselves from the European Union because it is not a union that is a happy event. There is permanent striving by each individual party. Now, for some 20 years, I've said what people in Europe must watch is the attempts at the wars within Europe, which will be wars of disassociation. Europe will endeavor to appear to be doing well by growing. It has been growing over its entire existence. In fact, possibly its only achievement is becoming bigger. That doesn't mean it's any better. It doesn't mean it's working. It just means that, like a huge giant with stunted legs leaning at 45 degrees forward, those little legs have to keep running like hell to stay mobile and not collapse flat on its face. Part of running is to take on new countries, thereby implying that it is doing well. There is little value from the point of view of the European Union in taking on these little countries because they are all a piece of political engineering. It merely looks as if they're becoming bigger. It's always better to be able to say you have 30 countries than 10. And yet, when you look at the European Union, they may have 27 countries, but just how many of those countries are contributing anything other than problems, bills, and cost? Not many. One of the reasons Britain saw itself as wishing to leave was we were more than a little fed up with having problems of our own in Britain, as every country does. You only have to wander around areas of America to realize the immense poverty and the incredible dissatisfaction of the people. And you will find Europe is much the same. Britain has its problems also, and people were beginning to resent building new subways in Poland with British money, funding airports in Greece with British money, and providing effectively the Navy for the European Union with British money, on top of our contributions to the European Union. And that, God knows, they were high enough. So I think the whole system has not been sufficiently thought through and sufficiently taken the people along with them. Do not forget that every time that there has ever been a vote on the matter of European Union in any country in Europe, and they try to avoid them where possible, there has never been a resounding yes from any country amongst what was 28 countries and now is back to 27. So I trust that covers that question, force majeure. Could there be a splintering of the EU in a north-south or east-west? I think there will be, as I say, a potential for wars of disassociation. And I don't mean hot wars, but huge squabbling over trying to leave and take with you something of what you put in. Do bear in mind that Britain has put into the European Union a totally disproportionate percentage of the money to build great gin palaces in Brussels and Strasbourg, to run fleets of cars, to make fairly useless MEPs because they don't have much say on anything. The decisions are all made way beyond the position of members of the European Parliament. The members of the European Parliament aren't even allowed to debate. They are merely allowed to make soundbite comment. So they don't even have a realistically democratic parliament. But their sales force are effectively the MEPs. The MEPs are hugely paid, lead a completely unrealistic life, have subsidized shops, have subsidized VAT-free facilities, have subsidized restaurants, are feather-bedded, have subsidized limos that drive them from airports to the assorted gin palaces of the European Union, have extensive overseas jollies. These are the perks of being employed as a salesman for the European Union. And the second that you start to question it, you become about as popular as a pork chop in a mosque. I trust that answers your questions, Force Majeure, and I hope that the rest of you found the questions as interesting as we did, and rather hope that you found the answers of help.
And on that note, Greg, I'd just like to say thank you very much.
My pleasure. Let's have some more questions.
Yes, indeed. We hope you have found this video interesting and informative. And if so, please give it a thumbs up and share it on social media. Please ensure that you have subscribed to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of any future videos. Also, kindly visit our website at illuminatisilver.com, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe either as a free or paying member for regular email updates and offers. Disclaimer. Illuminati Silver owners come from a background of banking, international wealth management and economics. Having now retired from these worlds, we are not qualified to give investment advice. Therefore, this and other productions must not be deemed to be giving such advice and merely represent the personal views of its owners.